Chapter 2. Can you kidnap an adult? Money, you don't have to come, Sirius said when Remus followed them outside. They weren't allowed to ride with regulars to the hospital, so they were planning on taking the first cab they found. He raised an eyebrow. What? Why wouldn't I come? Sirius gaped at him for a moment, and then looked to James for help, but he had no idea what was going on in Sirius's head, so he was on his own for this one. He couldn't think of any reason as to why Remus wouldn't want to be there for him. You love the ballet. Your brother is on his way to the hospital, Remus said simply, like that was all there was to it. That's probably all there was to it. Remus was loyal, and he had always been loyal. Even that period of time when he had quit the band, he was still their best friend. Sirius looked incredibly guilty as he pulled out a cigarette, lighting it quickly. He smoked a little bit recreationally, but most especially when he was stressed. And James finally understood. He wanted them to enjoy the ballet. He hated asking for help. Even just needing help made Sirius feel like he was weak. He hated feeling like he was a bother. James had always taken care to never let him feel that way. What he never seemed to understand was that he wasn't a bother. They had come to the ballet for Sirius and his brother, so if Sirius and his brother were leaving, then so were they. Almost the moment that Regulus had fallen, Sirius was rushing to the stage, pushing past the security guard with a rather impressive strength just to get to his brother. Everyone in the crowd seemed to have noticed what happened, and James had been appalled to see that some of them were upset by it, like Regulus passing out had ruined their night. He heard complaining that it ruined the integrity of the ballot for something like this to happen. James was disgusted with them. The show would go on. There were understudies, and things would pick right back up where they left off. The ballet planned for things like this, although apparently Regulus's job was no longer safe. Sirius mentioned that in a bit of a daze, just worried about his brother. Passing out on stage was considered very unprofessional, apparently. You love the ballet, Sirius said again, like he still didn't understand that Remus would choose him over watching Swan Lake literally any day. Peter hailed them a cab, trying to instruct all of them to get in. Sirius put out his cigarette, running on autopilot at the moment. Sirius had practically been ripped away from his brother, and then the curtains had dropped. Whether it was to give them some privacy or just to protect the remaining integrity of the show, James didn't know. Most everyone took it as a brief intermission, whereas James, Remus, and Peter started to try and make their way backstage to see what was going on. They hadn't been allowed back there, and one of the stage managers told them that Regulus was being taken to the closest hospital. Sirius was angry, and he was a little scared. It felt a bit like watching someone drop dead, and James had thought that it was almost hauntingly beautiful. Maybe he shouldn't call beautiful someone fainting, but well, it was. Everything that Regulus had done that night was intentional. It was practiced, and it was beautiful, even when he lost control of himself. James and Peter got in first. James ended up having to sit in the front seat so that all four of them could fit. He said hi to the driver, but it was obvious he was not looking to talk. Still, they could hear the conversation that Sirius and Remus were having when Sirius tried to pull out another cigarette. Mooney, really? If you want to stay, I don't. I won't be mad. I know you hate hospitals. And that was true, actually. He had been a very sick kid and spent more time than anybody ever should in a hospital or clinic of some sort. James remembered visiting Remus every single day they could, especially when he was there for extended periods of time. And Peter would always be the only one to remember to actually bring him the homework he was missing. Remus took the cigarette from Sirius before he could light it and practically pushed him into the taxi, mumbling something under his breath in Welsh. Remus hardly ever spoke the language, unless he thought they were being stupid and didn't want to tell them. Of course, Sirius was trying to worry about everyone when his brother was on his way to the hospital. He didn't know how to compartmentalize, so he just worried about everything all of the time. They were mostly silent the entire way there, deciding to let Sirius decide the energy. For the most part, they knew Regulus was probably not dead, so at least there was that. Something's broken, I think, Sirius said quietly. There hadn't even been the sound of the radio to fill the silence. Their taxi driver never made a move to turn it on. What do you mean? He fell on his arm. Oh, a broken bone. That wasn't the end of the world. Although, well, maybe for a professional dancer, it was probably the end of the world. If James were to break his wrist and he suddenly wouldn't play guitar, yeah, okay, so maybe it was the end of the world. And hospitals were the same no matter what part of the world you were in. They were sterile, the lights were fluorescent, the ambience was somber. They were miserable places, and so were the people in them. What do you mean I can see him yet? Sirius asked, his voice rising with each passing second. He was already one super tie, and now they weren't letting him in to see Regulus. Remus made his way over, perhaps to soothe Sirius or to just try and diffuse some of the tension. James and Peter were put in charge of getting something to eat. They had been planning to go out to dinner after the ballet, but that wasn't an option anymore. This is so uncomfortable, Peter said, loosening his tie while James punched Ito into the vending machine. He never would have complained if Sirius was around, not when he was ready to snap. But it was just James, and he was feeling the same way. They were all a bit overdressed for the hospital, wearing literally brand new suits. Remus and Sirius had long ditched their coat jackets, and they were hanging over one of the chairs in the waiting room. James was very close to doing the same thing, not even caring about how expensive it had been to buy. That's a lot of chocolate, Peter commented when James bent down to dig the snacks out. Remember Mooney? He asked, slightly amused. Remus was always eating something chocolatey, especially in stressful situations. Sirius ended up stress eating more American snacks than Remus did, though, pacing back and forth. James tried to reassure him that Regulus was fine, probably asleep, or getting cast put on or something. He's going to be so mad, Sirius said, quietly enough so that only James could hear it. It will heal. Yeah, but will he? When the receptionist called Sirius's name to give him an update, they also let all four of them into the room to go see him. He had been put under a general anesthetic, but he was supposed to be waking up soon. Before the whole music thing, James had wanted to go into medicine. So, where someone like Peter didn't completely understand what he was saying when he said things like hairline fracture, James did. Your brother is severely malnourished, the doctor said to Sirius. You said he dances? Yeah, ballet. The doctor seemed to grimace a little bit. Right. Well, in order for his bone to heal, he's going to need to eat and drink more. The thing about ballet dancers, James guessed, was that it was hard to tell if they were actually healthy. Sure, they all looked mostly healthy. Regulus was obviously strong and also very fit from all of the dancing, but that did not automatically make him healthy. Eat and drink more, Sirius echoed, staring blankly. Peter was the one who broke the silence after the doctor left. He was always the best at diffusing the tension. Mate, your brother's kind of pretty, Peter said. James couldn't help but agree, though he knew voicing this aloud was far from a good idea, especially after he glared at Peter. Just saying. Not the time, Pete, he said. There wasn't much to do except wait for him to wake up, and they ended up blowing up gloves into balloons, tossing them around the room and over Regulus's sleeping body. They were acting like children, but they had to get creative. The room was small and the entertainment was limited. They had all thrown their ties and jackets onto the chair in the corner, piling them up and forgetting they existed. Mary, their manager, ended up calling Remus. They were supposed to check in with her every night, and they had been a little bit preoccupied, so obviously they hadn't done that yet. Really, she was more of their friend than their manager. They had known Mary from school as well, and just happened to get lucky with the fact that she went to uni for 2 years and studied art management. Yeah, Mary, we're in the hospital, Remus said. They couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but from the tiny smile on Remus's face, they knew she was probably yelling at them for ending up in the hospital on their second night of a tour. What makes you think one of us got hurt? Regulus had started to stir awake, so Remus took the phone call into the lobby, probably going to actually explain the situation without worrying about being a nuisance. Hey, you guys should go, Sirius said, lowering his voice a lot. James shared the look with Peter. They were not about to leave. Not not the hospital, he clarified. But he isn't gonna want company here when he wakes up. James understood. He was about to get really bad news. It would be no help if he had to try and control his reaction for the sake of a couple of strangers. They found Remus in the hallway, and he was laughing about something with Mary. He put the phone on the speaker. James and Peter chorused hellos and the regular pleasantries. Look, she said, her tone getting more serious. I know you guys want to be there for Sirius's brother. Regulus, James interjected quickly. Yeah, Regulus. But you still need to leave at 6 tomorrow morning. Am I understood? James pursed his lips, not wanting to answer. It would be very difficult to get Sirius to leave his brother here with a fractured wrist, even if it was to travel to the next stop on their tour. And he was a shit liar, even over the phone. So was Peter. Remus sighed. Right, we'll be on the bus at 6, he said. Promise? They all hesitated. Lopin, I swear to God, if you guys are not okay, we'll be there. Good. The three of them stepped outside for a moment, each of them taking a cigarette from Remus's pack and mumbling something about how they were going to replace it. Not that it mattered, they just shared amongst themselves anyway, without much thought put into it. They were all thinking the same thing. How were they going to get Sirius on the bus with his brother in the hospital? Regulus would probably get discharged within a couple more hours. His arm had a cast and sling on it, and a green collar that Sirius had chosen, promising that he would like it. He broke his wrist, and he was going to be stuck in the cast for a few weeks while it healed. Peter checked the time on his phone, and it was quickly approaching midnight. What the fuck are we gonna do? Peter said. James blew out the smoke, watching it dissipate into the air as he thought. If Sirius wouldn't leave his brother, then they were just gonna have to take him with them. Regulus will come with us. Remus gave him a look, one that James knew very well. That's the worst fucking idea I've ever had. Is it? James asked. I mean, he comes with us to a couple of shows. Sirius gets to make sure Regulus is taking care of himself. We get to keep our tour. Sounds brilliant to me, Peter said, agreeing with James. That's because you two never think your plans through. What's that mean? It means that Regulus would never agree to it. James hadn't thought about that factor. Why wouldn't he agree? Wasn't it everyone's dream to go on a tour? Even if they weren't performing. Oh, Regulus was a performer. Shit. Remus noticed the exact moment that James understood, and he looked slightly smug about it as he lit up another cigarette. He was stressed too. He only chain smoked when he was stressed. Sometimes it felt like Sirius was their beating heart. Anything he felt, they all felt. A bit like phantom limbs, sensations that weren't really there but felt so real. James didn't know Regulus, but he was still worried about him. Peter stood up a little straighter, dusting his hands off and standing directly in front of James and Remus, a sort of wicked smile on his face. Come on, lads. We're the marauders. If anyone can do this, it's us. James felt himself smile despite himself, and he reached out to mess up Peter's hair. Wormtail's taking up motivational speeches again. Remus missed, a smile on his face. Peter swatted James's hand away. All right, but still, I think we can convince him. As a note to their school date, they came up with a plan. Sirius, they thought, would be easy. He would simply have to jump at the chance for his brother to join them on tour. They didn't really think otherwise at all. He was the constant in the experiment, the variable they didn't change. Regulus, he changed. Scenario after scenario. They had to be prepared. They knew almost nothing about him and they needed to plan accordingly. Was he stubborn? Probably. He was a black. But was he more or less stubborn than serious? Was his brother the weakness they would need to exploit? Hopefully. They could pull the guilt card and make him feel bad. Which, yeah, okay, it wasn't exactly moral, but they had a show in Charleston in 19 hours, give or take, so they were pretty desperate. Sirius came and found them after 30 minutes. He looked more than slightly exhausted, and when they entered the room, they could see why. Regulus was being incredibly obstinate. He was refusing to look at any of them, and he didn't say a word when they all walked in. Really and truly, he was pouting. Sirius, can I talk to you outside? James asked, regarding Regulus cautiously. It looked like maybe he had thrown something across the room, perhaps in a fit of rage or just to get Sirius to shut up. The odds were high either way. He nodded, rubbing at his eyes and letting the door shut behind. Somewhere in the back of his head, he felt bad about leaving Remus and Peter alone with Regulus, especially when he looked that angry, but they would all get over it. Was he like that the whole time? James asked. Hmm? Like what? All angry? Sirius laughed. That's not anger. James thought back to the storm he had seen behind his eyes and tried to think of what else it could be. It's not? No, of course not. When Regulus gets angry, you can hardly even tell. He just switches, I guess. He's perfectly calm and deadly, really fucking deadly when he's angry. No, he's, I don't know, upset maybe? Disappointed? Oh, James said softly. He stored that bit of information away, not sure if or why he would ever need it. So, what's up? Hmm? I assume you asked me out here for a reason. Oh, right, that. James cleared his throat, mustering up a small smile and praying he had been right about getting the easy job. Sirius was his best friend. He knew him inside and out. This was child's play. This was just a tiny little idea that they had, just in case. Mary called, he said, easing into it slowly. We have to be on a bus in a couple of hours. Fuck, I forgot about that. James nodded. Yeah, us too. Something shifted in Sirius's eyes. They got colder, sharper. James knew it had nothing to do with him and everything to do with his current situation. I'm not leaving him. I know. Good. We thought we could bring him with us, James said, ripping off a band aid. Once he said it, it was done and over with, just a small thing there to remind him, one that would hopefully dull in just a couple of seconds. He waited for his reaction, and Sirius had started chewing on his fingernails, a habit from where he was a kid that he tried not to do much anymore since he almost always had his nails painted. He complained that he was always eating nail polish, and Peter told him to just stop chewing on them then. Sirius had not thought that was funny. You want to bring my brother, a principal dancer, onto a fucking tour bus? Okay. Anger, maybe disbelief. James could work with that. He smiled in a way that was hopefully charming, although it never did work on Sirius in the past. I know, mate, and we figured you would never just leave him. Of course I would never leave him, he said defensively. But we've got a tour to finish, to start, really. This was all you could come up with? Sirius asked, and he kept looking at the closed door as if it were going to open any minute. James shrugged, slightly helpless. It really was all that they had. They couldn't very well keep traveling to shows and then traveling back to see regulars. First and foremost, there wasn't any time for it in their schedule. Second, it would also cost a lot of money that their management would surely not allocate for them. Sirius ran a hand through his hair. Okay, just let me be the one to tell him. There was a loud crash from the room, and Sirius started making his way towards the door right away. You left fucking money on warmth to tell him, didn't you? Putain d'abruti, he said, switching to French. James had heard him say it enough in the past to know he was being called a dumbass. He let it go since it was probably justified. Remus didn't know how to ease into anything, and Peter was sometimes so oblivious to social cues that he tended to never shut up. Regulus's eyes snapped up to Sirius first thing. James didn't know if this counted as anger or not, and he didn't ask. I'm not joining you on your fucking hippie tour, Regulus said. Reg, I said no, but we need no. Sirius snapped his mouth shut. He was angry. James at least knew that much. If he hadn't been sure, it was further proved by him storming out of the room. He looked to Remus and Peter for anything, any sort of help or saving grace, but Remus just slipped out of the room right after him, and Peter gave him a weak pat on the back. You're on your own now, Prongs, he said quietly before also leaving the room. James had no idea how he got left with the job of trying to convince Regulus, but James did not plan on leaving the room until he got him to agree. Regulus was staring at him, and by now he had to have recognized him as the neighbor with the music. Well, at least they could bond over that, if nothing else. He needed to find something to grasp onto, any sort of connection that would get him to agree to this. He sat on his chair, keeping his distance. James knew that sometimes he could simply be too much for people, so he tried to dial it back a little bit. It's not a hippie tour, James said to break the silence. I do not care. James nodded, letting the room fall to silence once more. How did this all come to rest on his shoulders? Regulus already didn't like him after last night, and now this was only going to make it worse. So, maybe James had a slight people pleasing issue, but he just could not handle it when people didn't like him. I'm James, he said, offering a smile. Regulus only glanced at him before deciding the hospital blanket was much more interesting to look at. Yeah, I know who you are. Splendid. We're like old mates then. You and I will never be mates. James wasn't deterred. In fact, it only brought him more energy to be arguing like this. Well, Regulus was arguing. James was just trying to help Sirius out. Says who? I think we'd get along quite well. We wouldn't. Why is that? Because I hate you. Regulus said like it was the most simple thing in the world to him. The sky was blue, the grass was green, and he hated James. Oh, right, that does complicate things a little bit. This also did not help the fact that James would do everything in his power to get Regulus to not hate him. If he couldn't handle people not liking him, hatred was a whole different story. He had not really responded well when his ex girlfriend told him she hated him, and she had actually known James. Had he already done something wrong? He pushed all of that away for now, choosing to focus on the topic at hand. They had less than 5 hours to try and convince Regulus to join them on tour. Sirius had started freaking out the moment the doctor said that Regulus was malnourished. James could tell. He tried to hide it, but James had always been able to read him well. Sirius was worried that his brother wasn't taking care of himself, and James could understand that. For a while, he had similar feelings about Sirius. There was a time where James wouldn't believe that Sirius was okay unless he was physically in front of him. Won't you join us just for a week or two? James asked. I can take care of myself. You passed out on your stage. Regulus grimaced slightly. Yes, thank you for reminding me, he said dryly. Sirius will never. I'm an adult, for fuck's sake. Tell him to just not worry about me. James gave him a dumb look because he was being dumb. If he knew his brother at all, which he did, then he would know that what he just said was literally the worst advice he could have ever given. It was in Sirius's nature to worry. That's never going to work. I don't care. Regulus, just fucking come with us. For a week. Is a week really that bad? Yes. Why? Because I don't want to go. Well, too fucking bad, James blurted out. James was going on tour with his best mates, and Regulus was coming with them, whether he liked it or not. Excuse me? Sirius won't live without you. We won't live without Sirius. I will carry you over my shoulder and drag you to the fucking tour bus if I have to. That's kidnapping. It felt like Regulus knew exactly how to frustrate him, and James was falling for it more and more with each dry and sarcastic comment. Well, like you said yourself, you're an adult. I still think it's illegal. We're in the States. Everything's legal here. James supplied unhelpfully. Really, he thought that if he could just make Regulus smile or show any emotions, then he could also get him to agree. He wasn't joking about dragging him there by his ears if he had to. Regulus opened his mouth and then closed it again. James had no idea what he intended to say, but he never got to find out. Regulus was kicking him out, and if anything, James knew when to step back. He did not intend to give up at all, just give Regulus a little bit of space to think it over and then go right back at it. He could be very convincing.